Welcome to the Insight Report Edition 1, The Role of Community Housing Providers and CHAR. For years, people have asked, what is the community housing sector? Who are you? What do you do? And most importantly, why? This report, and those to come, will address these questions and many more. New Zealand's housing history has had its highs and lows. There were times when the majority had adequate housing, strong communities, and affordable living costs, with housing taking up about a third of household income. But New Zealand and the world have changed significantly in recent decades. More families are finding it harder to live securely and affordably. Supporting them is a key challenge, which community housing organisations have taken up. Working with local and central government, the community-led sector is stepping up to offer new solutions. We believe every New Zealander deserves a decent place to call home. Across the country, grassroots groups, big and small, are working tirelessly with the resources they have to house their communities. Our vision is clear: to see all New Zealanders well housed. We must all use our resources and talents to work towards a future where everyone is well housed. We invite you to join us in exploring what is working and how we can do that more often in more places. This is the first edition of our new Insight Report publication, with 3 to 4 editions planned annually. Each edition will focus on a specific topic and be accompanied by resources on the upcoming CHAR Hub, an online knowledge platform launching later this year. Throughout 2025, we will be making copies of this report free of charge to our members. The intention in 2026 is to move to a subscription-based publication, open to all. We would love to hear your feedback on these publications and the topics discussed. Click the QR codes on the back cover to access this report online and leave your feedback.
What does CHAR do? Our mission is supporting the growth and development of community housing in New Zealand. We do this in collaboration with a diverse range of organisations and individuals. We believe adequate housing is a human right, and we're committed to seeing all New Zealanders well housed. Our purpose is to support our members as they deliver proven solutions, innovate, and improve housing outcomes for their communities nationwide. The foundation of our work is supporting our members and other housing providers dedicated to creating positive change to their communities by providing affordable homes. We foster connectivity and knowledge exchange within the sector, providing relevant insights that empower all members, regardless of size, to make informed decisions. Through our leadership role, we deliver knowledge, insights, and resources to strengthen every entity involved in community housing provision. Working with government and other stakeholders, we collaborate with government, councils, financial institutions, the building industry, and other stakeholders, providing data, research, and best practice insights from New Zealand and overseas. We have privileged access to financiers, government officials, ministers, mayors, and councillors. We bring our members' voices, the voices of lived experience and knowledge, to decision-making tables as we collectively work to improve our housing system. We also collaborate closely with Kayanga Ora, New Zealand's largest social housing provider. We believe lasting change in housing happens when all New Zealanders understand what needs to change and how it benefits their families, communities, and the country as a whole. Our role is to share the housing story and bring everyone on the journey with us. Our mission extends beyond technical solutions to include education and informing the public about the role of community housing. Housing is integral to well-being and healthy communities. No single entity can deliver all that is required. We hope to inspire everyone to contribute their solutions. We work alongside Te Matapihi, an independent Māori voice for housing. CHAR is a charitable incorporated society with members who vote on important matters, set direction, and elect representatives to the CHAR Council, which serves as our board. CHAR's membership spans two categories, members and partners. Members are groups that either provide or intend to provide community housing. They can be groups of residents or tenants of community housing, or groups that advocate for community housing. Currently, we have 94 full members. Many deliver a wide range of services from housing system, navigation, and financial capability. Support to transitional housing, affordable rentals, and progressive home ownership programs. Members are typically supportive landlords and co-owners deeply embedded in their communities. They have established relationships and built trust, often bringing years of volunteer work and unfunded support services. Many began their organisations providing health or social services before expanding into housing. They reflect the culture and context of their operating environments. Around 40 of CHAR's members identify as Maori organisations, with a growing number of Pacific Peoples organisations also providing community housing. Some are small and focused on local needs, while others manage thousands of homes across the Motu. All share a commitment to delivering stable, affordable homes suited to their communities. Partners include individuals, local authorities, professionals, financiers, private developers, and other public or private entities that invest in, lend to, operate, own, or develop affordable community or social housing.
While much of the CHAR Hub focuses on housing and policy issues, it's essential we remember that housing profoundly impacts people's lives. Each Insight report will feature a CHAR story, sharing real experiences and success stories from across the country. Through these narratives, we highlight the human side of housing, bringing voices to the forefront and showcasing the impact of effective policies and initiatives. In this edition, we speak with Fran O'Connor, a resident at the Toru Apartments in Queenstown.
Thank you so much for having us here in your home today. And what a lovely home it is. It's my first time visiting this group of apartments. Now tell me a little bit about your past here in Queenstown. We've noticed that the housing situation over time seems to have changed quite dramatically, particularly the last sort of 10, 20 years. What have you observed?
Yeah, well, I came here 25 years ago, and strange, we were living in a caravan then, and then we got a place to rent. But even back then, it was very hard to get something to rent that you could afford. I was fortunate. I got a place up in Queenstown Industrial, but the rent kept on going up and up and up. And then my daughter, who was living just over the back here, suggested I went and live with them, which I did, and that was great. Except they decided they'd had enough of Queenstown. Oh, that's right, that's what happened. The landlord came along and said he was putting the rent up $200 a week.
That was on your daughter's place?
My daughter's place. They were renting a place. And she said, oh, okay, we're off. So they moved to Cromwell, and now they're on the West Coast. Then I went from there. Where did I go to from there? I think I went to my daughter's place. I've got another daughter living at Lakeside Estates. And as funny as this sounds, people throw their hands up. I was living in a tent in their garage. Now, that was actually, pretty way out there, but it was also private for me, so I had my own space. And then where did I go? Then a friend bought a little caravan for me to live in, and it was a very small caravan. And that was at a friend's place, and then out at the Arrowtown Motor Camp. And then I worked my backside off to be able to afford to buy a caravan of my own. And then I lived in that for 6 years, all the time being on the books of the Affordable Housing Trust. But at one stage, a place came up, but I was still earning a bit too much to go into it. And then I've I've had a few problems because of a car accident I had, and then this was being built. And so Karina, who I've got to know Karina and Julie really well. She came to me and she, come and have a look at one. So I did. And the consequence of that was I ended up living in those.
Amazing. And was that, when they said come and have a look, was that even before it was built? Were you looking at plans?
No, that was after it was built.
Okay, yep.
But before there was people living in here.
Yep.
It was the weirdest feeling walking into this building with all these apartments. But, for me, having things like an inside toilet and a proper kitchen, and as funny as this might sound, that fridge is the first brand new fridge I ever have had. We bought the fridge. You buy the fridges for yourself. Everything else is provided. And, that was something for me. And that was only 3 years ago. So,
yep. Yeah,
it's just these little things.
But collectively, they're massive, aren't they?
Yeah, and I've got a wonderful kitchen. Look at it.
Yeah, yeah. And are you happy here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Close to everything. I don't have to fight with the traffic to get to St John when we drive the shuttle down to Invercargill. You've got doctors, dentists, chemists, supermarkets, Spotlight, most important. I sew.
So tell me about some of the work that you do in the community, because you've received awards for your service to others.
Oh, yeah, I've done. I believe that any community you live in, you should volunteer. Okay, if you're part of the community, and you can do it. I was working right up until the start of COVID. I was a tour guide. Technically, I still am. But in between that, I still did volunteer work. I volunteered for St John. I do the shuttle. I've done some historic stuff in Queenstown, and it was myself and 2 others who were the initiators of the Wilding Pine projects in Queenstown.
Ah, okay, yep.
Which have now become so political, and those of us that started it have just sort of faded back, which is fine. I don't want to be involved in it now. And I'm also involved with senior citizens. I drive their van for them when it's needed. I just help people wherever there's a couple of old couples I help.
And are those shuttle services helping people get to appointments, like medical appointments and such?
In Invercargill.
Yeah, okay, because that's the nearest tertiary hospital, is it? Understood.
Yep.
What are you seeing and hearing in your community around housing stress? Is it a growing issue from your perspective?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I had a friend of mine who was living, this is going back about 8 years now, but he was living, I won't say where he was living in his car, but he was living in his car. He had 2 extremely bad hips. He couldn't afford to find anywhere to live. And this is it. I mean, if it wasn't for the Housing Trust and the fact that this is classed as a social house, which is, that's a very unfortunate term in New Zealand, I don't know where I'd be.
Yep. That's the reality.
That's the reality of it. And there's a lot of people like that too. And, starting at what, 500, 550 for a 1-bedroom unit, you just can't afford it.
Yeah.
And you're looking at something like, there was one advertised today, $750 for a 2-bedroom small unit. And I mean, I know it's not just Queenstown, but it seems to be, I don't know, because there's a very old population in Queenstown. The older population, like everywhere, we're one of the troubled children. We're the what do they call us? And baby boomers. That's right. But I mean, I've heard so many times over the last few months, because I know a lot of people, tourism, St John, just being involved in the community, people whose families have had to move away.
Right, because of the cost of living.
They cannot afford to pay $800 for a house when only one parent's working and they've got children. And I mean, this is a big problem here. How do you keep workers here too?
And you've experienced this obviously within your own family.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. So there's a bit of, there seems to be a theme here of quite continuous churn of people who are coming in and then being forced out by the cost of their housing.
And people who've been here 30 years are leaving because they cannot afford to stay here. My daughter, who lives at Lake Hayes Estate, well, it was a young family, it's not now. She was in one of the first affordable housing trusts, buying the houses to buy. Yeah. So, yeah.
So talk me through your personal experience of meeting the Housing Trust and how you ended up in this home. How did that work for you?
I don't even know how I met them.
Well, that's good. In a way, isn't it? Because they were in your community somewhere and you bumped into them.
I did fill in the paperwork.
Okay.
About 6 years ago.
Yep.
And so they were in touch with me all the time, and I'm very fortunate in the respect that I get along with most people. You know, I don't upset people. And so they sort of just kept in touch with me all the time. And you get the newsletters that said, you know, are you still interested, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, I'd say yes, of course. And then I was offered a place, but at that time there was a couple who were both unwell that also needed a place. And me being me, which is fine, I'm not complaining about being me, I said, look, give it to them. If they were unwell at that stage, I was fine, so they needed it more than I did. So yeah, and then they just kept in touch with me. And how long ago was it? It must have been about, what year were we in, 2024?
Yeah.
So it must have been at the start of 2021 when this building was almost finished. And Karina and Julie got in touch with everybody and said, are you still interested? We're having basically an open day. Come along and have a look. Yep. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And then I ended up in this.
In terms of community building here, I can see pretty much out the window there is the local school, which is
the high school.
A high school,
yeah.
Right? Is this what's your observation around the social cohesion, the community connectedness, and any change you've seen over time?
That's an interesting one, because we live in such a transient population. If you're considered a local, which I am, there's definitely a connection between us all, and we all know each other and that sort of thing. But then you've sort of got the other side of that where we've got all these young people coming in from overseas, and that it's a really hard one. Yeah, we do have a community. There is a community connection here. I mean, the people, most people in Queenstown are just puddle along.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people who've been here most of their lives.
Yeah. Which
I envy them for, to a point. But none of us are particularly happy with what's happening here now.
Yeah, yeah. There are, though, and you are sitting here in a home that you were supported into by the local community housing trust. There are some really good examples of things that are working well.
Oh, yeah.
That we might encourage other people to do a little bit more of more often, maybe.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the community housing group in Queenstown have allowed so many people. This is a rental. It has enabled so many people like myself to get into a comfortable place.
Yeah, yeah.
Without them, I don't know where. I mean, I think there's about, I don't know how many rental they've got in here, probably 15 or 20. Then everybody that's in one of those would have had nowhere else to live.
Yeah.
But they just can't keep up with it.
Yeah, so the demand is, I think my understanding is at the moment there's 1,200 on the waiting list.
Yeah.
And that's not people, that's households.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they just can't keep up with it.
Yeah. So if for example, I wasn't me, but I was the Minister of Housing or somebody who could make decisions that local people can't make about things that local people, even local government, don't have power or control over, what would you say to Christopher Bishop as the Minister of Housing about what you've experienced and the difference it's made for you?
I would ask if there's any way that they could get more built, and just say, we do have people living in cars in Queenstown. We do have people living in tents. and this isn't just single people, this is families as well. Please, can you help these people get into something solid? I mean, it doesn't have to be flash. It doesn't have to be state of the art. Just something that would enable them to live a comfortable existence like we all deserve. And we do deserve it.
Do you feel safe and secure here?
Yes. We're in a secure building here. Like you found out, you couldn't just walk in the door. So there's a thing up on the wall there, and I do feel safe here. I do keep my door locked all the time when I'm on my own at home, but that's just something I've done for years. Wherever I'm living, my door's locked.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of stories coming out now, and it's like, and especially older women on their own are targeted.
Yeah, we've seen across the country a growing number of homeless or houseless older adult women, and that is something that is really concerning. And in some ways, we're trying to help middle New Zealanders to understand that this is actually happening. There's a lot of people live their lives and don't see homelessness or houselessness. They don't experience it and they don't see it. And yet, in some ways, people are only 1 or 2 paychecks away from that.
That's right.
If they get some bad luck.
Right. Well, we never, when I came here 25 years ago, I doubt if there was any such thing as homeless people. You never saw them, you never heard of them. And now it's all the time. But it's very hard because a lot of, like we say about Queenstown, you've got the top 5%, and it's the same in a lot of places who own everything, and the other 95% work their backsides off to keep them in that. Right. But something that really shocked me the other day was I was going at the front of the building, and down the end over there was an older woman walking with a shopping trolley full of all her stuff. Now, I had never seen that in Queenstown before.
Yep. And when was that? Quite recently?
Oh, about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's happening all over the country for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But people don't seem to think it happens in Queenstown. A lot of New Zealand believes that everybody who lives in Queenstown's wealthy. We wish. But they're not. And that's like the high school's a decile 10. It shouldn't be. Because it's there's a lot of kids going to that school whose parents can't afford things.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting because my understanding is there's very little central government involvement in addressing the persistent unmet housing need in the Queenstown Lakes area, the whole region.
I tried.
Again, I suppose a message for people in Wellington about what the true lived experience is here in Queenstown?
It's interesting you say that because just recently we had, I don't know who it was, we had a politician down here and they walked away and said, oh, Queenstown hasn't got a housing problem. And that stuck with a lot of us. And because I've been so involved in the community and things like that, it's like, take your whatever it is, your sunglasses off and have a good look.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate because I get help with my food and that. Because my only income now is my superannuation and I don't have any savings or anything. And Kiwi Harvest supply a heck of a lot of food to people in Queenstown who can't afford, and that's all affected with the housing.
So a lot of this is invisible, isn't it? Unless you really make the effort to go and look for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because of the people I know and what I've been doing, I know a lot about it and that. And it's like, no houses, no food.
Yep.
Power goes up. Even I, and I'm quite comfortable to a point, but even I thought when we heard the power was going up, it's like, oh my God, no, that means you've got to rejig things.
Yes.
But even when you're in a comfortable place like this, you've still got your phone and your power and insurances, because I refuse not to have insurances. It's just something, there's all that. And you've got to sort of juggle things around to,
And sorry to talk about money because it's a little bit...
I'm not worried about it. Go for it.
Okay, so what is because a lot of people are now coming to retirement age. They have no assets or savings. and they're stepping into fixed low income with the pension. Can I ask, what is the pension these days? I don't know.
Well, that's a hard one. Per fortnight, I now get with the latest increase, this is after my rent's come out, because my rent comes out first, which is fantastic. I think I'm on $750 a fortnight.
So your rent is 25% of the market rent, is that right? And then the rest gets topped up by the government?
Yeah, so my rent is, what is it now? I don't know what it is now because it's just recently gone up.
Yep.
But it's about $150 a week or something.
Yep.
Which is fantastic.
Yep.
You know, I'm very, very grateful.
Yeah.
And
so that's
that comes out
income-related rent subsidy.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, yeah, I understand.
The funny thing is the government puts your benefit up and then your rent goes up. So you just sort of don't feel, but I mean, I don't complain. I'm not one of those people who complains, but
is that sustainable for you though, the way things are? And
I make it sustainable.
Yeah. Okay.
I have to.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, what else can you do? My son-in-law keeps on saying, move away, go and live somewhere else. And I said, because I'm 74 and at my age, it's like, you know, you've got to go away and make new friends and doctors and dentists, and there's no point.
Yeah.
And the way I shop for groceries, I don't spend a lot on luxuries or anything like that. I don't complain about it. It's no, you know, at least I've got food. I've got a place that's warm. I've got a heat pump. I've got a washing machine. I've got a fridge. I've even got a dishwasher, which I must admit I use because I get a free hour of power. You know, I've got all the necessities.
Mm.
So I'm not complaining. You know, I really do wish there was more units like this.
Yep. Yep.
For people who are coming up to, not just retirees, as young families, yeah.
Yeah, we interviewed a young couple who are on the waiting list earlier today. Lovely young couple, both full-time workers.
Yeah.
They're in a bed sit in someone's garage effectively. And I was amazed because they were so grateful. They were so thankful that they had a safe place and some family that they could rely on. But they were really thinking that if they had a child and started their family, which they would like to do sometime soon, actually, unless they can find a home, they're going to have to leave.
That's right.
And it doesn't sound like they're alone.
No, and that was like when I was living in the tent in my daughter's garage. I mean, it sounds really bizarre, but it was really cool. It was my space. It was like having a bedroom, and it meant I was away from the main house. If I hadn't had that, I don't know where I would have been. I did move into the house later, but they had children and things like that. You know, what do? You've got to move away. You've got a good job. You've got good friends. What do you do?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a theme I'm hearing from you and from others. It's really a pretty simple request for more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because down the side of this building, because you came in the front, down the side there's two more sections. Mm-hmm. And the guy who built this building was going to build two more buildings there. But then with COVID and everything else, he couldn't do it. So that land has been for sale now for since I've been in here. So we're just hoping, and they were going to build two more. And then there's a guy beside BP, if anybody told you about that one. There's a guy beside the BP station, and there's this weird-looking building, which is actually a car park building. Don't ask me why somebody built a car park building. We have no idea. He's applied to the council for consent to build some workers' accommodation.
Right.
I mean, he's got the road in and everything. We haven't heard yet whether he's got that consent. And if they don't give it to him, there's going to be such an uproar.
Right.
If he's got the money and he's willing to do it, let him do it.
Mm. And that's worker accommodation.
Yeah, workers' accommodation.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've been talking to international groups and local government and other places, and there are schemes in other parts of the world where large employers, are actually providing the accommodation for their workers as quite a normal way of doing business, including, you know, looking across there to the school. Where are the teachers living, and are they managing to hold on to their staff?
I don't know, but I know they struggle. But it's interesting you're saying that because NZ Ski has got the old YHA youth hostel. 2 or 3 of the other big employers here have bought buildings. They have to. They're going to have no staff.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go out and start cleaning hotels.
Fair enough.
You know, I'd rather do volunteer work. And that's not being a snob or anything, but, you know, yeah.
Yep. Can I ask you for a moment what your thoughts would be if we don't address this problem in the Queenstown context? What does that look like in terms of the future of the town, the community, the people who live here now?
The town will collapse. I mean, as I said, I've been a tour guide here for 25, I've been a tour guide for 45 years, but 25 years here. And I said probably 10 years ago that the town had lost its soul. That's what's happened. Okay, and this is all because of the fact that it's just, I mean, there's a couple of people who organise meetings for people who are in this situation, and it's amazing how many people turn up to it. And it's like, if we want this town to survive, apart from infrastructure, there's got to be something done about accommodation, or it's not going to survive. You know, the town cannot survive without workers.
There's some who would argue that housing is infrastructure in the way that schools and hospitals, you know, I mean, it's semantics maybe,
Yep.
but it's critical, isn't it? Yep. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yep. We must, I mean, there's no pussyfooting around or anything now. If we want this town to carry on, and I mean, I heard something yesterday about Auckland Airport having more people coming through it now than it did before COVID. And it's like, you know, and then they wanted to build this flaming airport in Terrace, and everybody's going, oi, stop. There's nowhere for people to live. If you're going, what do you do? And I mean, they're building, 2,500 new houses out there and another couple of thousand out there. People aren't going to be able to afford them. It's the wealthy, and it's a lot of people from overseas coming in and buying the houses, which is pushing the prices up. What do you do?
What's your thought on the market will fix this problem and the market is going to provide affordable housing?
Going to happen. I mean, every time we get told in Queenstown, we're building this, I think there was a thing that came out sometime recently that for every new development that was built, they had to build so many affordable houses, right? But it doesn't happen. I mean, the ones that my daughter is in Lakeside Estate were built by the Affordable Housing Trust.
Okay.
And they're still building them. But these developers that are told you, well, I don't even know whether they're told now, you must have a certain percentage of your, and this is what everybody says. It's just not happening.
Not at the scale that it needs to make a difference, right?
No.
Yep.
I mean, not everybody, I mean, what's the average house price in Queenstown at the moment? It's over $1 million.
1.7.
Oh, jeez. I didn't know that.
Yep.
And the interest rates are going up. And
yeah, it's a pretty tough environment, and there needs, funnily enough, for there to be affordable housing or subsidised housing, there needs to be a subsidy. So the market's not going to do that. We have to find other ways of doing it in the way that your community housing trust is doing here so well. And you've got a very courageous local government in a way that they've been trying to get this going. They're sort of leading the way.
Oh, it's been fantastic. I think it's been going 15 years now. And Julie, she's absolutely hilarious. I locked myself out of here one night, which everybody does in the building. So I rang her and she said, I'll be out of there in 5 minutes, and she turns up in the gumboots. And that is just the sort of person she is. Julie and Karina have just, they just work their butts off for it. And every obstacle they come to, they find a way around it.
Magic.
It is magic. And I mean, look at this. This is proof.
Yeah. I think my observation is there's quite a lot of New Zealanders who are in denial about the fact that we have a housing crisis because they haven't experienced it. But more and more now, I think, with the evidence and the awareness, we need to ask ourselves as New Zealanders, what sort of a country do we want to live in? What's our vision for the country that our children and our grandchildren will live in? Have you got any thoughts on that?
That's a really hard one because I've got 3 grandchildren here and 3 in the North Island, and it's like, I don't want them to struggle to find somewhere to live like their parents did and like I did. I want a New Zealand where everybody has somewhere to live that's safe and secure. I really wonder sometimes what the kids. Well, I mean, there's a lot of children being brought up in very entitled housing, but then you've got the other side of it where there's not, and you've got 2 or 3 families living in one place, and this shouldn't happen. The families cannot. I mean, I know some cultures do it, but that's fine. There are some families who don't even really know who their family is because they're living with so many other people. And I would like to think that my youngest grandchild's 13 now, but my great-grandchildren would have a place to live that they could call home, not just a house. It's got to be a home.
Yeah.
Where they're safe, they're comfortable, they're warm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you for welcoming us into your home today. It's a real privilege to be here and really thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for coming and giving me the chance to...
Nestled in the Southern Alps, the Queenstown Lakes District is a breathtaking region of snow-capped mountains, crystal clear lakes, and scenic countryside. Yet, beneath the beauty, the district faces severe housing pressures. The Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust is leading the way in providing community housing solutions. We visited with Julie Scott from the Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust on site at one of their new projects to talk about some of the homes they have provided around the region, and also sat down with her for a deep dive interview to discuss some of the challenges and the innovative solutions they have developed to help locals into homes.
Julie, thank you so much for taking the time. It's lovely to be here in your hometown of Queenstown. Thanks for taking the time to be with us.
It's a pleasure.
I wonder if we could start, please, with a brief overview from your perspective about the current state of housing as it relates to the communities in the Queenstown Lakes area at this point in time.
Well, I think the best way to start is by looking at our own waiting list, the Community Housing Trust waiting list, which now sits at 1,212 households. So that's not people, that's households. That's literally thousands of people who are on our waiting list seeking some form of housing assistance. That indicates that there's a real issue in this district for not just buying into properties for first home buyers, but also for just securing an affordable and secure 10-year rental property.
Have you noticed a trend or a change over time? Has this become more acute recently, or is it a steady growth that you've observed over time?
Yeah, I think in the last few years, it has increased significantly, but particularly post-COVID. So we saw a drop in rental properties or rents around the district during COVID. Obviously, a lot of properties came off to those short-term visitor accommodations, the likes of Airbnb, and they went back into the long-term rental pool. When COVID finished up and the borders reopened, those properties went back onto the short-term visitor accommodation, and our families in the district were left wanting. So we've seen huge demand in the last couple of years.
Can you talk us through your vision of a desired future then? We've talked a little about the current state of the housing that you've got here, but what does a better future look like for you and your communities in the Queenstown Lakes area?
I think it's not dissimilar to Community Housing Aotearoa's vision for all New Zealanders well housed. I think we want the same in this district. We want all members of our community to be well housed, be that through a rental property or assisted ownership or in the private rental market or private ownership. Everyone should have the ability to and have access to affordable and secure 10-year housing.
Yeah, great. And so I suppose the next question from my perspective is, how do we bridge the gap between where we are now and where we want to be, where people are adequately housed? What are some of the mechanisms that you're using in this place, which has got unique characteristics as a housing market because of the tourism, obviously, and the impact that has? What are some of the things you're doing that you feel are working well?
Yeah, well, we've always argued that there's no one silver bullet to the housing issues across the country and in this district. But one mechanism, one tool that we have been using really successfully for 21 years now is inclusionary housing. Used to be known as inclusionary zoning, now we call it inclusionary housing. And essentially, that's all about capturing value uplift that is created through the rezoning of land and enabling that to be used for affordable housing in perpetuity through a retention mechanism. And our trust, alongside council, have been doing this on the ground for 21 years. So it's working really well. We want to see it keep going. We want that plan change to come into the district plan and lock it in the district plan rulebook in perpetuity.
A lot of other community providers around the country will look at you with envy having a inclusionary housing in place, which essentially, can you help me explain it to viewers? It essentially is providing you as the local charitable housing trust with low cost or free land, is that right?
Typically, it's free land. So how it's worked for the last 20 odd years is every time a landowner has gone to council and said, look, we want our land rezoned from rural to residential, and that might be through a private plan change, or it might be through a resource consent or special housing area when that legislation was around, our council has been saying, okay, well, we're happy to do that on behalf of the community who we act for, but if we do that for you and enable that value uplift, we want the community to share in a small amount of that value uplift. And what that has looked like for the last 20 odd years typically is around 5% of new sections that are created in any new development come across to our housing trust, and we retain the value of that contribution in perpetuity.
Fantastic. So you're doing that through a community land trust structure, is that right? It's held in some way?
So we don't call ourselves a community land trust, but we do essentially operate as one. So we receive land and we hold on to it forever, and then we might build homes on it and allocate them either under a rental program or under our assisted ownership model, which is a leasehold model. So the household buys the improvements, the house itself, and we own the land. So in that respect, we do operate like a community land trust.
Yeah, brilliant. And talk to me a little bit about the households who are in your homes, the nature of those people. What are they doing in the community here? Where do they come from? Are they locals? What's the sort of profile of your households?
Well, they're a broad mix, because Queenstown Lakes is a really multicultural place for a start. So we have a really diverse range of people in our community. However, to be on our waiting list and to be eligible for housing assistance, you have to have a residency status. So we're not in the business of helping that transient workforce, the seasonal workers. That's not our mandate. We're focused on long-term residents who are committed to the district, wanting to put down roots here. Now, we operate broadly across the housing continuum. So we're on one end doing public housing, and the other end doing assisted ownership. And then in between, we've got affordable rentals and rent to buy. So the incomes of the households we're helping differ dramatically from those on public housing on very low incomes to those in assisted ownership could be earning up to $130,000 as a gross household income. They would typically be workers. They might be police, teachers, nurses, tradespeople, service workers, hotel workers, the works, if you like. And then you might down the other end, we have quite a few seniors now that we're helping. So they may be on the pension, and others who are on very low incomes, everyone in between.
I'd like to ask a little bit about the resistance and the opposition that you have seen over the last 21 years of running what sounds like an awesome program. There clearly have been periods of well-organised opposition to this. And is it fair to say that's ongoing now as you seek to get this as a permanent fixture in the district plan within the local authority?
Well, that's interesting. I think broadly there's wide support across the community for the trust and the work that we're doing, because we're essentially two small towns, Wanaka and Queenstown, and we've helped hundreds of people now. So most people in the community know someone who's been in a community housing trust house or is in one, and understands that that's really important to keeping that household, that family, or it might be a single or couple in the district. So they get it. However, the inclusionary housing aspect is obviously being challenged, particularly by the development community for obvious reasons. It is a financial cost to them that they have to bear, and so therefore you can understand that why they are opposing it. Not all developers are. There are developers out there who over the years have been supportive. I mean, arguably the very first developers who signed a deed in 2003 was done on very much a voluntary basis. So yeah, but as a whole, I think we have wide support for the trust. It's just this inclusionary housing plan change is providing some pushback.
Julie, one of the things we're thinking of at a national level as Community Housing Aotearoa and our Māori, the Māori Voice for Housing Te Matapihi, is pushing quite hard into the government for legislation at a national level in support of what you and your local authority are doing here in Queenstown. It seems from the outside like that would be of assistance if we were hoping to get inclusionary housing up and running in other parts of the country, that there seems to be a nervousness amongst the local authorities. Do you think that would help if we had national legislation in support of it?
That would just be of massive benefit. As well, we have been advocating to central government for many years to bring in central government legislation to enable councils to roll out inclusionary housing, rather than having to go through this process of fighting the developers over it. I talk to so many other councils around the country who are really interested in our model, and they're all so keen on inclusionary housing. Not all of them, but those where there's they have high-end properties, and they have an issue with housing their workers. They're very interested in the inclusionary housing model, and so they're certainly waiting to see what will happen with the QLDC's plan change. But if central government could legislate it and pave the way to make it a bit easier, that would be an amazing outcome.
Can you talk us through the risks that would help manage? What are the sort of more technical aspects of the difference that would make for you and for your local authority if there was central legislation in favour of inclusionary housing?
Well, I think the main one would be, so at the moment we've got this plan change variation going through QLDC, and it's anticipated that it will end up in the Environment Court, and that's going to be a cost to QLDC and therefore a cost to the ratepayers. So we would love it if it didn't have to go through that process, if it could be legislated and enabled by central government.
Yeah, so that would just be a higher legal bar, really, wouldn't it, in terms of making it a supported program rather than each local government entity being exposed on its own to legal challenge within its territorial authority.
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah. Talk us through, please, your view on the extent to which the communities here are divided or not divided by whether they own assets or own their homes or don't own their homes. Is that something that you see play out in the community? I've just been reading some news articles and researching for this trip, and it seemed that there were different camps, let me put it that way, and perhaps asset ownership or home ownership was one of the lines in the sand. Is that feel?
Yeah, you mean really that old argument of the haves and the have-nots. We're really starting to see that now. I feel like when our trust was formed in 2007, so 17 years ago, that wasn't such a clear divide, whereas now it really, really is. And I think it's true all around the country, but it's really highlighted in this district where the median house price is 1.7 million. So good luck getting one of those if you're on a gross household income of 70,000, which is the average income on our waiting list. So it's really clear. And, without a capital gains tax, it feels like those haves will just continue to build their wealth, while the have-nots will just continue to pay high rents and pay the mortgages of those lucky few that own the properties. It just doesn't seem fair and equitable, and it doesn't feel like the New Zealand that we all grew up in and we love.
It occurs to me you're in the middle of a process. There's strong potential. There may be legal challenges. In my mind, when you describe inclusionary housing, you're talking about a value uplift, a zoning uplift that occurs with the stroke of a pen in local government. And in a way, I question whether that actually is a cost to the developer. I understand it might reduce their margin a little bit, but in many cases, the value of the underlying land with the stroke of a pen, with the zoning change, is a benefit for where it's totally legitimate for the community to capture some of that for our low and moderate income households. If you could speak directly to property developers and the development community here, which I'm sure you did during the hearings, what would be the key message that you'd like to share with them? What would you really like them to understand about what you're doing and why it matters?
Well, I guess that goes back to what you just said, that it really is only a small cost to them compared to the relative cost of that inclusion, of that rezoning process, and that stroke of a pen. Not a lot of soil has turned, but suddenly that land that was zoned as rural is now zoned as residential and worth phenomenally more. So it's about sharing that value with the wider community, because ultimately we all live in the community, and we want these people in the cafes serving us a coffee, or teaching the kids in school, or when we turn up to the hospital we want a doctor and a nurse there. So we need these people in the community. So, you know, my plea to those developers is to share that value uplift that's created through the rezoning process. Share a little bit of it with the community for the benefit of all.
Julie, more generally, if we look at inclusionary zoning or inclusionary housing, this is actually not a new idea at all. You are, in some ways, a unicorn in the New Zealand market, but overseas, this is a mainstream activity that has been happening for decades, and it also happens, your proposal is, I believe, at 5%. I've seen documents from over the world where 20, 30, 40, even 50% is the inclusionary housing percentage. Can you talk about any international references that you can think of in terms of more mature inclusionary housing programs and where that's led to other nations and other communities?
Yeah, well, inclusionary housing is really the umbrella term, if you like, and then the mechanics of how it's delivered differ around the world. So our council has opted for that tool where they say, okay, 5% of the new sections created come across to the trust. Actually, sometimes that has got as high as 10% and even 12.5% on one development. So the standard historically has been 5%, but there is room there to move. However, around the world, say for example in London, what they typically do is, rather than, as I understand, what they do is say 50% of the new buildings and properties that you create have to be affordable, so at a certain price point. So they might not necessarily be transferred to a community land trust or a trust like ourselves, but they might just say, right, 50% have to be at this price point. I know in the States, inclusionary housing falls under other names, and it looks more like a standard fee that's applied to any new development, and that will come across to the local municipality or trust to be held and used for affordable housing. So it does vary across the world.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that has had a profoundly positive effect on more inclusive, diverse and thriving communities in those places. So this is, I suppose, for the New Zealand audience, it's important that they know that this is not a radical new concept. It's actually something that's quite widely part of the toolkit, is it fair to say, of options available?
Yeah, look, and a really great example is Aspen in Colorado. So Aspen's actually our sister city, and they're over at the moment, the mayor of Aspen and a few offsiders. And we have been sitting down with them, our mayor, council, there's about 20 of us around the table, and talking about different issues and solutions. But the issues are incredibly similar. The problems are the same because we're both these tiny little towns within our cities, but these really, really similar issues around housing the workers. However, they have incredible tools in terms of the ability to tax land developers, which has enabled them to build up a huge amount of housing stock for their workers. It's something like, I'd have to look at the numbers, but it is really phenomenal.
Julie, there's been an explosion, if I could use that word, of NIMBYism directed at the likes of Kāinga Ora, the state provider of social housing in various communities across the country, and expressions of concern around ghettos, or to use an unpleasant word. How do you manage the composition of communities when you are deciding on the placement of the homes that you're building within a broader context? What does that look like?
Yeah, and look, that is a legitimate fear for communities who have never had a community housing in their area before. However, we have come across that, and certainly that was something that we dealt with 17 years ago when we first started building developments. And one of the things that we're really proud of is that we build mixed tenure developments. So a really great example is the Toru apartments in Frankton. So these are 6-storey, high density, small 1 and 2 bed apartments. They were created by a private developer. However, we purchased 50 of them, 50 of the 78, and we've retained 42 of those. 15 of them are in public housing, and the remainder are in our assisted ownership program. Now, the remainder of those properties, which is about 30 odd, are in the free market. So they might be free market rentals, or they might be first home buyers. And that's great. And that you can walk down the corridors of that apartment block and you won't know if the door opens up to a public housing tenant or a first home buyer. And that's a true mixed tenure model, and that gets communities mixing with each other. It creates a really good outcome. There's so much evidence around the world that mixed tenure communities provide really positive outcomes.
Yeah, great. So it's really nice to hear in a high density situation, even because that's the most extreme expression of mixed tenure potentially, isn't it? When you're really literally on top of each other.
That's right.
Julie, would you mind just mentioning some of your projects and your communities that you've participated in this region? Where are you, and where are your families living?
Well, that's again one of the fortuitous things of inclusionary housing, is that we're spread throughout the district. Where a new subdivision occurs, you will likely find us there. And so we've built over the years, I think we've built about completed 10 different development projects of varying scales. We have got homes we built our very first development in Lake Hayes Estate, one called Nerin Square. I think you'll be paying a visit to there. That's a true comprehensive development, mixed tenure. We built 44 homes in Shotover Country, and then another 6 in the same area a few years later. We built 10 homes in Arrowtown on land that we received from council, and we've got another 68 lot development on the edges of Arrowtown happening at the moment. Again, on land that we received from council for $1. The value of that land was $10 million, so a significant contribution from council. And one that other councils around the country, if they're looking to do affordable housing and house their workers, could be thinking about what excess land have they got, right? They should be looking at this as an example of how you can go about it, partnering up with a local chip to provide community housing. And also over in Wanaka, we've got a heap over in Wanaka as well. We've got a 28 lot development underway in Lake Hawea. And we've got 2 homes underway in Mount Cardrona, which is actually a resort zone, but they'll be contributing land there, and we'll be building and housing people there.
Busy times indeed. And how many people did you say you have on your households on your waiting list?
1,212.
Goodness me. So that's a big long pipeline to address that. How do you feel the future looks in terms of that future pipeline and your ability to continue to meet that persistent housing need?
Well, it's very much reliant on inclusionary housing going through, the plan change going through, and that will give us that pipeline of housing that we need to keep fit to building the homes to service these people. It's also very much reliant on central government funding. So we've obviously got a new government in place now, the coalition, and we haven't had any clear direction on housing policy at this stage. So we're waiting with bated breath to see what housing policy they are going to deliver to the chip sector, because unfortunately it's really, really challenging to build affordable housing without providing some sort of subsidy, be that the land from developers through the inclusionary housing process, or local government providing land, or central government providing some subsidy. And that might be under the progressive home ownership loan, which has worked really well over the last few years, or public housing, or for affordable rentals. There's a whole heap of tools that can be used to help chips around the country deliver housing.
Yeah, and I think in summary, it's almost about pulling all the levers, isn't it? There's no silver bullet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, look, my mind goes back to periods of New Zealand history where we were the envy of the world with our housing policy as a broad-based home-owning democracy. What do you think the implications are for us as New Zealanders, civil society, if we don't focus and continue to address the substantial and persistent unmet housing needs we have in our communities in New Zealand?
Well, you would hate to think that we would end up in a position like some of those second and third world countries where the people start revolting because they just are really, really desperate and unhappy and do not have the finances to carry on with life effectively. You know, we already started to see about a year ago, this time a year ago, we started to see a lot more people sleeping in tents and their cars down by the lake, in dock camping grounds. And it's really unpleasant. And the community was deeply unhappy about this happening. So this is going to happen again. And winters, we're getting down to well below 0 degrees. So we don't want people sleeping in their cars. You know, I would be taking my dogs for a bike ride in the morning down by the lake, and you go past all these cars and there's tradies worker boots outside the front door and they're sleeping in there. It's not what we want, and it's not a healthy community to have that happening. So I think it's really important that we find a way to house people sufficiently.
Julie, I think on behalf of New Zealand, we want to thank you. You're a beacon of hope here in the Queenstown Lakes District in terms of inclusionary housing. And we remain really hopeful that we can spread the magic that you've created here over the last 21 years more widely across the country. And so just wanted to say thanks so much for what you're doing and what you're continuing to do. And we're with you and backing you as you seek to get it permanently put into the local plan. So.
Yeah, well, thank you. And obviously, when you say thank me, the thanks really lies with the local council, who's the one who's been doing this for 21 years and pushing through with the plan change. Our trust is just the lucky recipient out the other end, making it all happen, turning it into housing and housing people.
Yeah, visionary leadership. Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Julie.
Introducing the Char Hub founding partnership with Westpac New Zealand by Heiko Jonkers. Westpac New Zealand is committed to helping more New Zealanders into their own homes, as well as working to understand and overcome the barriers that prevent some New Zealanders from finding a place to call home. We are committed to supporting the affordable housing sector. We're delighted to be entering into a new partnership with Community Housing Aotearoa that will help us to realise these aims, supporting the organisation in its mission of delivering affordable housing solutions to communities throughout the country. The partnership with CHAR is the latest milestone on Westpac's journey. We recently committed to increase lending and support of affordable housing to at least $1 billion by September 2027. Over the past few years, we've worked closely with a range of community housing providers, including Maori and iwi, to support their innovative pathways to home ownership. Through these solutions, we've seen more than 700 families secure their own homes, and we see the potential to help even more New Zealanders to achieve their home ownership dreams through greater collaboration with housing providers and the wider sector. We are grateful to CHAR members, New Zealand Housing Foundation and Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust for their generosity in sharing their programs and knowledge to support other community housing providers to grow. In supporting further growth, we believe CHAR's on-the-ground insights, combined with our financial expertise and strength, will ultimately enable greater delivery of practical, scalable housing solutions. As well as providing funding to CHAR, we will work with them to help community housing providers to expand their impact. For Westpac, the partnership represents our commitment to being part of a greater solution that is community-led. It's about stepping up to help create a better future together.
What makes community housing providers unique? How community housing providers are helping to solve New Zealand's housing crisis, by Paul Gilbert. Community housing is a form of affordable housing that works alongside private housing in the open market. Typically, community housing organisations are not-for-profit groups that meet housing needs through a range of affordable rental and home ownership options. They provide an alternative to the public housing provided by Kāinga Ora, formerly Housing New Zealand, and local authority housing. CHAR, alongside Te Matapihi, serves as a voice for these diverse organisations. Community housing organisations provide around 30,000 homes throughout New Zealand. These may be provided by faith-based, iwi, hapu, or Pacific groups that offer tenancy advice services or provide homes directly. These organisations provide warm, safe, dry and affordable homes through a range of housing options, including emergency and transitional housing, affordable rentals, and home ownership assistance. Many providers originally began as social services or health services and have added housing to their offerings as they recognised its importance in improving social and health outcomes. Some organisations provide additional wraparound support services directly, while others ensure necessary support links are available for their residents. The sector is diverse, long-term oriented, and takes many shapes and forms. However, it is unified by a single idea and possibility: the goal of ensuring all people are well housed. Regulation and registration of CHIPs. The Community Housing Regulatory Authority is an independent agency within the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development that registers and regulates community housing providers, CHIPs, in New Zealand. Organisations that demonstrate the ability to meet the Community Housing Regulatory Authority's performance standards become registered as community housing providers. Since 2014, registered community housing providers have been able to provide homes to those on the public housing register and access the income-related rent subsidy. Other community housing organisations that are not registered cannot access the subsidy but still offer alternative affordable housing options for rent and purchase. The community housing sector in New Zealand remains small compared to other countries, and many New Zealanders still need access to good housing. Community housing organisations, whether registered CHIPs or not, are actively working to increase the number of available homes to ensure all New Zealanders have adequate housing. International evidence shows that those countries with a thriving, large-scale, charitable, non-governmental housing sector tend to have significantly better outcomes for low and moderate income households. More than just housing, the deeper purpose of community providers. Local providers typically have strong community connections and a vested interest in growing social cohesion, especially when working with vulnerable households. Relationships matter profoundly. When people know you, know your name and know you care, the likelihood of achieving successful outcomes rises consistently and dramatically. Community housing providers are not-for-profit entities focused on values, principles, and purpose. This means they consistently work in this space for the long term and tend to be deeply experienced, well-connected, and trusted advisors in their communities. The importance of charitable purpose cannot be overstated. Affordable housing, and the money that is deployed to deliver it, must be retained and recycled in perpetuity for the system to deliver long-term, intergenerational affordability. If this is not the case, most affordable products last one iteration and are then lost to the market. The collective lived and worked experience within the community sector far surpasses that of other players in the housing market. There are tens of thousands of years of collective experience in the sector workforce. For example, over 50% of the 500 attendees surveyed at the 2023 Community Housing Aotearoa National Conference had more than 10 years of directly relevant work experience. Community housing providers largely hold the institutional memory of New Zealand's housing system. They understand what works and why it works, and have led much of the innovation that is unique to the context of New Zealand's housing system. Building connections. How community housing goes beyond shelter. Community housing providers have built relationships and trust over time, earning a strong social license to operate within their communities. This invisible but crucial aspect of the sector's success is hard-won and easily lost. In many contexts, it enables projects to succeed where they might otherwise have failed. These providers are recognised as friendly landlords, calculating rentals based on what works for households and what they can afford, rather than maximising financial profit. For generations, community housing providers have approached housing through a more holistic lens, serving their communities. Some now describe this approach as an environmental, social, and governance strategy. Maori and Pacific Peoples community housing providers deliver a wide range of services, products, and programs. Many of these are delivered without government involvement or funding, as community-minded individuals serve their community's needs. Many aspects of this service provision often go unrecognised in official government reporting. Reimagining housing, innovation, and social cohesion. The community sector is deeply committed to creating more pathways and accessible entry points for households to have greater sovereignty and choice over their housing arrangements. A comprehensive housing needs assessment forms the foundation for developing a well-matched supply-side solution. By understanding pre-existing community connections, providers gain a significant advantage in providing the right house, with the right tenure, in the right place, and at the right price. Community housing providers believe in community building, which means creating mixed, diverse, and inclusive developments and delivering homes, not just houses. The ability of community housing providers to deliver a variety of tenures allows them to respond with tailored solutions matched to household aspirations and needs. The most successful community-led developments deliberately include shared spaces, community hubs, and bump spaces, a public space to promote community connection, to support residents in getting to know each other in mixed tenure environments. Placemaking is crucial in rebuilding social connectedness and cohesion. A sector of many voices, the varied landscape of community housing. Community housing providers come in many shapes and sizes. Many emerge from post-treaty settlement iwi and hapu, while a substantial number have faith-based origins associated with churches, mosques, temples, or synagogues. They range from large organisations managing thousands of homes to small providers working in special interest areas or in rural towns. The community housing sector has a diverse whakapapa. Some organisations originated from social service backgrounds or decades of running successful community health services. They are geographically diverse and unevenly capitalised. Many of the largest chips are tangata te tiriti organisations that have had preferential access to government grant funding and income-related rent subsidy IRRS contracts, often at the expense of tangata whenua organisations. Community providers have a strong track record of innovation, evident in new ownership structures, tenure models, finance mechanisms, papakainga and marae activations. The sector leads the way, working with partners in developing new housing supply, financing, alternative tenures, leasehold structures and community land trusts. A commitment to change, addressing New Zealand's housing shortage. Many are dedicated housing organisations with a determined focus on local delivery. What all providers share is a commitment to fulfilling the right to a decent home, providing housing and access to people entitled to warm, safe, secure and affordable homes. New Zealand's housing challenge is fundamentally because of affordability. For decades, housing prices have increased much faster than household incomes, increasing the available stock of affordable rentals and home ownership. Options has become a growing priority. A provider need not be a registered community housing provider to deliver these important products and services. Ultimately, all providers are united by a shared goal, seeing all New Zealanders well housed, and they will persist until that goal is achieved.
Meet the team, David Zussman, a life dedicated to community housing. David joined Community Housing Aotearoa in 2016 and is currently the Manager for Engagement and Support. This broad role enables him to support CHAR's work program, assist colleagues in delivering their priorities, and engage directly with member networks, while supporting individual organisations.
David Zussman, good to have you here in the Holy Trinity Cathedral in Parnell. Looking forward to talking a little about housing with you this afternoon. But I'm aware you've been in the housing game for quite a while. I'd really love if, to start off, you could share your journey from some of the early days through to the present in terms of housing and the roles you've played over the years.
Okay, well, I was very lucky to start as a trainee housing officer for the London Borough of Bromley, somewhere before the beginning of the 90s. So that's, Bromley's an outer London borough. And I was kind of really lucky to do that job because not only did I get trained by them in lots of different parts of housing, but I was able to do one day a week. I went off to what was then Westminster College or University of Westminster and did a professional qualification in housing, which I did pass despite spending a bit too much time in the pub, probably at lunchtimes. But that was really great for me, and I was able to progress as what they called a housing officer, and then I became a team leader. But that London Borough of Bromley was one of the early large-scale voluntary transfers, so I experienced that whole kind of movement from being a council organisation to being what's called a registered social and a housing association. It was a decision where the council, it was under legislation that the council could divest or sell its housing stock, but it needed 2/3 of the vote of the tenants. And in those days, they weren't selling it at market value. It was much reduced market value, and in return there was a charter and a commitment to tenants of that the rents would only increase by so many %, that there would be investment in maintenance and backlog and maintenance and those sort of things. But it enabled the independent housing association to actually borrow from the private markets because of the kind of value that was in the housing stock. So this was 12,000 homes across one London borough.
So David, in the British context, is the housing ownership in terms of the provision of the social and affordable housing, is that retained and recycled within those housing associations?
It is generally, except for the legislation of the right to buy, which applies to those housing associations and those tenants as well. But generally, the concept is that these are organisations that continue to build and respond to the local need of housing in the areas that they exist. I mean, it's been a while since I've been part of that scene, but the current scene is there's some very, very large housing associations now that have become national, and fewer of the smaller ones.
So David, going back to your early career, can you just walk us through the next steps and stages and the parts of the system you worked in?
Yeah, so look, I had about 10 years with the Housing Association, and so it was kind of great forming ground for me, and got to kind of manage a multidisciplinary team. But this is all about managing housing, so it was what we call the tenancy and property management of like 3,000 properties. And then I kind of shifted to some other kind of project work. But at that point, I'd begun the transition to move to New Zealand. And actually, the last thing I did was something that was new for the Housing Association. I was kind of project managing what was called a youth foyer project with another partner, which I really enjoyed. And it's kind of influenced kind of the work that I did when I got back to New Zealand. The irony is that probably when I left England, I told everyone, oh, that's it, I'm doing something different. I'm not going to work in housing again. I'm going to do something different. And so about 3 months later, I got a job with Housing New Zealand as a tenancy manager covering someone's maternity leave in Panmure. And actually, that was a fantastic year. That team in Panmure taught me a lot about what it means to be a Kiwi. And so I really appreciate kind of that environment and working with them. Had a little break, but I kind of got a love for the community development and the housing. And a little time later, I had another job with Housing New Zealand. I was the community development manager for Talbot Park, which again, it just combined two things that I, by that time, loved: housing, and community, So we were right in the middle of kind of, a redevelopment of a number of houses in Glen Innes. And that was 18 months there. Had a little break in the UK, where actually I worked for another housing association in the north of England this time, which was also brilliant. But when I came back, I was offered a role with a not-for-profit organisation, community housing organisation in South Auckland. I was with them for 10 years, and that organisation was a real community-based organisation, grounded in kind of emergency housing, social justice, and community housing. And so, that was really kind of an honour to be part of that. So I saw a kind of lot of work with them, and the social justice suited me because it manifested itself in, being able to articulate and advocate in the media for with others for housing change.
David, there's a theme of grassroots there in terms of tenants, tenancies and such. Like, I'm really interested to hear your view on the place for tenants and the agency of tenants within the housing system and what role you think they play or should play.
Well, that's a great question, because actually when I was with that organisation, that community housing organisation, my office ended up being at the end of a corridor next to the housing for 6 families. And I reflected on that because I was very comfortable with that. And, being that close just gives you a kind of bit more of a reality of what it's really like. Because you can never know what it's like to be living in that situation when you're providing the service. So it's given me a lot of reflection. Look, generally, I think we say tenants are at the heart of everything that we do. I think there's probably in fact, there is a lot of good practice of involving residents, clients and tenants, but I think there's a challenge for our sector of really putting them at the heart of decision making. I think we generally, with good intent and generally good results, we'll make decisions, but if we challenge ourselves, we're making them on behalf of other people. And so we have to question ourselves at the governance level of all organisations. What would it be like to have this discussion or make these decisions with the people who live here, with the people who are impacted by these decisions as part of that discussion? So I think there's some work to go on that, and I'd love to see us take that even further. I I'll be honest, I think there's probably more practice than we realise. So one of the first things I'd love to do is find out the great work that probably is being done. But I suspect there's a long way to go.
So on the themes of involving tenants in decision-making, how can that be embedded in the system?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I suppose I was referring within an organisation level, within our community housing providers, but it's just as critical because there's all these policies are being made, you know? And again, by a system that's well-meaning, we hope. You know, the work that we've been doing with many others recently has just given us some amazing insights. The voices and opinions of people who use the system are there every day. And there's a real problem we've got is they're just not being listened to, and not just listened to. When we mean listened to, it's not just active listening, it's acted upon. So the challenge for us is how do we, if we really want to solve the challenges in front of us, then we have to find a way of including those insights in the changes that we need to make.
David, interested as a follow-on to that, what you see as a sort of culture of learning, what role for curiosity, what role for quality, and how we define quality in terms of the work that we do in the housing system?
I've given this quite a lot of thought because, you know, many in our sector, we've been around a long time. So we're kind of, you know, at the point where we should have another cycle in our maturity and the level we deliver services. And I have no doubt that generally the services that are delivered are great, you know. I'd like to see more evidence about that and it be more robust. But I think we need, again, it's a challenge for ourselves to, if we want, quality doesn't just mean one-off quality, it means consistent quality. How do we bring quality again and again and again into the services people we provide the services to, not only within an organisation, but across different organisations and across different services? And I think we've got a way to go with that. But really the most important thing, I think, then is to have curiosity. We see a lot of great, you know, we're in the world of social media and reporting great things, great stories, which is fine, and I'm okay with that. But I want to see curiosity. So we scored 89% on whatever. There's still 11% to go. You know, we're leaning into this and going, what happened to that 11%? So, you know, if we housed 95% of people seamlessly, what was the experience of the 5%? And so I know we've still got a long way to go, but we should never take away that curiosity.
David, on the theme of leaving no one behind, what do you see as the role for security of tenure and long-term permanent housing in the context that we're in, where we do have ongoing issues with the temporary nature of some of the things that are happening in Aotearoa at the moment? So
again, look, my response to that is based on, you know, long-time experience. And just to be clear, I've provided services with long-term housing and I provide services with short-term housing. So, you know, and, you know, I think there's a time and a place for them all. However, I think where we are now, we need to focus on the goal and the outcomes. And for me, you know, that's manifested as long-term appropriate housing. I think permanent housing is often in there, but it's not always permanent what people need. It might be for a stage in their life, and choice is a very important part of that. But I think we need to all focus on what that means. And I mean, I've thought about this a lot. I mean, I'm part of the community housing in Aotearoa currently. We've been very strong in our support of the right to a decent home and what that means. And I think generally everyone believes that. I think generally we've failed. We've failed people. They haven't failed. We've failed to fulfill their right to a decent home. And therefore, what we've seen is a growth of support and services and housing options to meet our failure. But let's not pretend that it fulfills appropriately the right to a decent home. So we should do that really well. And it is done really well by really great organisations. But all of us should have a long-term goal, wherever we can, of doing more of the long-term, more of the decent home. And that obviously has all those other components, and the components for different cultures and different perspectives. That's what we have to do more of, and that's what we all have to come together and do.
There have been some catastrophic failures internationally and locally recently on our watch, as you say, as participants in the housing system. I'm thinking of Grenfell and the forensic analysis of the 30 years of failure that led to that outcome. I'm also thinking of Loafers Lodge in the New Zealand context. What are your observations of some of the things that are most troubling that we most need to focus our attention on in the New Zealand housing system at this time?
Well, most troubling are kind of the long-term kind of mistakes and choices that we make, big and small, that ended up having a cumulative impact. And again, really, I mean, I don't really want to go into those. I've thought again about where the solution lies, and that's why kind of, I'm kind of proud to be part of a community housing sector that really, I mean, the regulation, standards, policies, procedures, risk management, health and safety. These are things that often quite hard to do every day, but they're actually the things that keep people safe, and we'll never see the lives that are saved by having great systems, great processes within our organizations. And so that's one thing that's one thing we do is continue to work with organizations and encourage them to do the best job they can do and not stop there. There's always improvements. And sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes it costs lots of money. Sometimes they get criticized. But actually, you say you're housing people well. I think we talk about words like safe, secure. So what does safe mean? People get to live, safely. There may be a fire, there may be an incident. They live through them because of the systems in place, the building materials, the infrastructure, the way the human kind of issues were managed and practiced, and biosafety and education and all those things. And they're the things that you have to do every day, and they don't always hit the headlines. But we go back, I mean, it's easy to be critical of those, but we do need to also then, I think we have a responsibility to point out where we see those failures and demand, request, try and influence for a higher standard. And I come back to, that's why quality is really important to me. And this isn't a criticism, this is an observation. We've just got to stay focused on and always challenge ourselves that we can do it better.
Thanks, David. I'm interested now in some of your observations around the things that we're doing that are working really well that we might do more of more often in terms of sharing some of the successes and the strengths that you see out there.
Cool. Well, I mean, look, we see great things every day. And I think that's because I think there's a genuine desire to kind of just do the work and do the best for the people we work with. But that manifests itself in lots of different ways. And I think, we talk about the unique contributions of our sectors because actually every organisation is completely different, right? When I was at that London Borough Bromley, the Equal Opportunities poster, funny for an English organisation, was Vive la différence, celebrate, don't discriminate, But the point about that is we're often told that there's so many of us, we're so diverse, that's a problem. Well, actually, it is what it is, and that diversity is a strength. So I think we have to recognise every one of these organisations, location makes a difference, the history makes a difference, culture, even the buildings they're in, the geography and all those makes a difference. And so one of the pledges is to go around and look and see the personalities of those organisations, and they're all kind of focused on doing a really good job, and they've all got something about unique about them. But what they've got in common is that housing, the right of someone to housing, but also those support services that, access to those support services, making a meaningful life. They're also passionate. They're leaning forward because they could see the problems, they could see the gaps. They're never satisfied with the status quo. They want to do more. So those are kind of some of the general things that I see that kind of inspire me every day. I also, I notice, because I've been around a long time, the stories that impress me are there's some of those smaller organisations that I know that go under the radar, and I can't believe how they've managed to do a development. They've always got a housing development undergo, and they're small. I don't know how they do that, but I do. Tenacity, focus, relationships, kind of not giving up, the energy they put into. So, that I have a lot of admiration. We're in a position where we get to see a lot of organisations, but we see the amount of work that they put in to deliver. It's incredible.
David, I'm interested at a personal level in what it is that, because it can some days it can be pretty tough to get up and go to work in this sector because of the stuff that we see and hear and are trying to help with. What's the motivator that gets you out of bed in the morning to keep doing the work that you do in this sector?
Well, it's two things. It's the big things and it's the small thing. So, ultimately, I do have a kind of social justice gene in me, slightly argumentative one. I like a good argument and a fight. I'm disappointed when people agree with me, but it's, there's something really strong about, aligning together with lots of other people for wanting to see us all do better in New Zealand, do better for people, whoever they are, and, whatever that means. But I've learned also that can be really exhausting because, sometimes it's just hard to see the answer. And I think the answer is out there. So the other thing we have to acknowledge is, you want to see everyone housed, but every individual family you house or you meet a service for, that's got to be a good day, And so if you don't take that balance, so for us, what does that mean at Chart? It means different things for us. It might mean, seeing a big kind of shift, seeing kind of people come together in a big network like our conference, but equally it might be an organisation that we just do a one-to-one with and we see something, just click into place and they progress. So those are the sort of things that we have to balance it out with. Ultimately, this is a message for everyone. It is hard work, and we also see a lot of people put a lot of time and energy in it. And one of the things we do say to people is look after yourselves, look after your organisations, look after your people, because you need to have that energy to take this work on.
David, I was with the Auckland City Missioner this morning, and she knew I was going to be asking you a few questions, and she really wanted me to ask you if you see a pathway through. And she's really talking about the complexity, I think, of the crisis, or call it a catastrophe, that we have in our housing system at the moment. And she's really probably talking about hope. And what are your thoughts on a pathway through and finding a way forward for our country and for our people?
Well, I refuse to give up on the hope that there is a pathway, even though sometimes it looks really, really hard. And I think it's going to take all of us to actually, I think we need to have a hard look at ourselves and actually say, what do we all agree on? And sometimes, again, this is going to sound like a criticism of individuals, but it's not. It's a criticism of the system, a system that has made us all very busy doing day-to-day stuff that requires this funding and that funding round, and this contestable process makes it very, very difficult. And so I think the answers are out there. But we just need, everybody's working with the same intent, but not quite. So it's kind of so near and yet so far. And I think what we've seen, we see the answers in front of us. The progress that could be made. I mean, the word long-term commitment, long-term vision, and really holding together on that. And I think, we're at an interesting time. It's interesting to be frustrated at the system, the politics, but ultimately we have to take ownership of ourselves. There's enough of us in our sector that we have to come together and find the time to agree. That's going to take, we talk about leadership. Well, what kind of leadership? That's individual leadership and accountability to yourself as well as others.
David, could you talk to me about your view of the unique role that is played by the community sector in this space? And I don't mean just registered community housing providers. I'm talking about community in a broader sense.
Well, I think, to me, if I reflect back, it is about community, right? And just remembering that everything we do is based in communities. I mean, for me, it is a strong housing reference because that's been my whole kind of career. And when you provide housing, of whatever kind, but hopefully great housing, fulfilling the rights of people and your responsibilities. I used to love thinking at night. It was a responsibility I could worry about, but you go, this is amazing, we're helping house this many people tonight, safely and securely. But then take it another level. They're all part of this community. So community housing providers and community organisations generally are long-standing organisations. So they've got to think about being part of the fabric of a community. So it's choice now, but choice in the long term. So that's why we don't need to own everything, but just like everyone, some assets that are owned intergenerationally work for people, but they work for our organisations too, so that we can be housing not just this generation, but the next generation. But remembering that means not just housing them, it's the homes, it's how they integrate in the community and the connection and the contributions that those people make. The other thing is that we have to do is, look, people, there's just so many labels, just people like you and me in a home with a family, maybe we're not with a family, just wanting to live a life and being housed. And I always puzzled by the number of distinctions we make. And if we could just, get rid of them and value everybody, And yes, there's reasons, there's tough times, there's difficult situations, but actually that's what it's all about, living alongside each other, making sure everyone's got the same opportunities we have. Now, that sounded really, but that's the role our providers are playing by holding their space in communities.
David, thank you. I'm interested now in terms of your current role, because you've got a nationwide role in terms of supporting and enabling the community sector as you work with Community Housing Aotearoa. What does that look like when it's going really well? What function does Community Housing Aotearoa play in the New Zealand housing system?
Cool. Well, at a really high level, I think we're here to try and represent as many of the diverse views we have across the country, but under a concentrated approach. So us, that's about all New Zealanders well housed, which, allows us to kind of prioritise and put principles to our other work. But effectively, for me, we're here to help grow and support the sector and make them. Yeah, and there is an assumption. Growth for me means, whilst we still need housing, they've got a role to play in building, providing, managing more great affordable housing. Okay, that doesn't mean without any questions asked. It's got to be where it's needed, based on demand, and all these other things. But then we've got a role to say, look, you're great organisations, but we're here to help you be as good as you can. There's two things about that. We can help to provide advice and support, and we do, but we can also sometimes ask questions and just remind everybody that, we signed up to these responsibilities. Now, we have to do that in a way that's not kind of condescending and a way that, is informed. And we have to do that by guidelines and hosting conversations and having positions on things. I think the other thing and a job we've got to do is, I think our sector is made up of amazing experts, and then part of our role is to demonstrate their expertise in the different settings they have. And I think that's something that we're looking at very closely now, because I think it's something that is missing from the understanding of our sector and our organisations.
David, could you talk to me a little bit about one of the core roles, clearly, of the community sector, as well as kāinga ora, is tenancy management. And what does really great tenancy management look like when you're doing it really well?
Well, that's a good question to ask me, because I did say I started as a trainee housing officer, which basically is a trainee tenancy manager. And actually, it is, I have quite a few loves, but it is one of my loves, is tenancy management. And to me, it's always been an undervalued part of what we do, but hopefully it's pretty much valued in our community housing organisations. Tenancy management is that front line, right? It does two things really. I mean, it's looking after doing the things that you need to do and keeping an eye on them, making sure the property is looked after. I mean, there's a property side to it, but there's a tenancy obligation side. To me, it's always been about celebrating rights and responsibilities, not enforcing them. So, making sure people are living well and they know their rights. And if you get something wrong, acknowledging that. But actually, it's a relationship-based piece of work. That's what it's about. And that can make a huge amount of difference. And that's kind of, I'm represented tenancy managers management as the most important element. And that's, I think there's others that are important, but this is your interface with your tenants and their families and your properties and your assets and in the community. So to me, it's to be celebrated. And, one of the things we've tried to do at Chart various times is kind of bring tenancy managers together and operational managers to discuss some of the issues and challenges that they have. To be fair, we do that across any of the areas. But yeah, I think it's also about taking care of business, right? So I think one of the human failings is to always go, project manager, this project's really interesting. Then, let's build the next housing, that's really interesting. This project's really good, let's fundraise here. But actually, every day you do tenancy management. And to be fair, it's not just tenancy management, it's the property management, it's the asset management. It goes back to actually doing things right every day, that quality side of it, and training. I was taught, if you see something, you act on it, right? It may not even be your responsibility, but you're getting paid to do a job. You've got some resources. You see the missing window, you see the cracked window. Then sometimes you're too busy, but actually that you see it, do it because it could make a difference to somebody.
David, I'm interested I don't want to bore people. People sometimes think policy's dry and uninteresting, but it plays a critical role. Can you talk to us about policy and the role it plays within the housing system?
Yeah, look, I'll talk about that, and particularly from that, that's a key part of our role at Community Housing Aotearoa as well. And so, it's part of our responsibility to provide the best advice we can to government departments, particularly in this case, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, but it's others as well. We'll talk to anyone, health has an interest, lots of other government departments do. So, we're always there to try and provide as the best input we can as early as we can, using our expertise and insights to help provide good policy advice. I'd like to see that policy arm be much, much, much stronger within government. And again, this is a system issue, there's such a kind of dominance of procurement and results driven that often, there's not enough time and resources put into their policy teams. So this is about the power and art of influence. And with a system, again, it's one of these things you have to get up again and again and start afresh and with good intent and believe in good intent, because sometimes you just don't know whether the influence is happening. So that's some of the policy stuff. But actually, CHAR also has some very, very well-informed positions. I mean, I'm not, we've developed some expertise and knowledge over the years, partly because our members have that knowledge, but partly because we've got a team that's got long-standing knowledge and experience. So actually, we're very strong. I think our submissions are very strong. They're very well-informed. We work with our partners. We're using better evidence and research are all part of it. So that is a really important part of it. I think, we don't have control over the end result always, but we've just got to take responsibility for doing our bit as well as we can and creating a home for those resources so others can use them.
But I'm interested to hear your thoughts in terms of the role that CHAR can play with regards to the hearts and minds of the general public, because there's quite often a lack of knowledge or understanding, even of the community sector and what it does. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a number of parts to this. And it's one of these things that, if you're looking for the big bang and suddenly we've done our job and everyone knows about us, I think we'll be waiting a long time. So, but there's definitely a role here. Look, I think we've definitely got a role to shine the spotlight on different kind of providers around the country and the great work they do. And that's my point about showing there is expertise. I think we want to show that there is real expertise there. I don't think that's overlooked, because these are organisations that some have been around a long time, long-standing records of delivery with real evidence, of delivery. And I think that is happening, and we can do more of it. But then there's, that's not going to do it on its own. So it's about, what are the big issues we can really that resonate with people. And clearly we're at a time when housing is important for everybody. I think it is difficult. We have to take a long-term view, right? And encourage long-term, responses. That's challenging in our current world, where we are, for everybody on every issue. But I think, what I've seen also is there's lots of different ways of getting the message across, because we all work differently and respond differently. So it's kind of that mix of some written, some's going to be social media, some's going to be short films, some's going to be long films. But actually, I think CHAR's responsibility is to keep using it in a targeted way, because it can have a life. The life of these things could be much longer if we use them, properly. And I think that's where CHAR can come in and really play a role.
David, what is the future for our response as a nation to homelessness?
Well, that's a big question, so I'll answer it, try and with a focused response. I think, look, first we have to kind of acknowledge where we've come from, and I'm actually going to deal with the response rather than where we've come from, how did we get here, because I think there's a kind of, maybe there's other narrative on that, but it's well understood, or maybe it needs more illumination. But look, actually, when I was working in that Auckland not-for-profit, we used the word of homelessness, and government couldn't even speak the word of homelessness at that time. So, and I think we've come a long way in some ways of recognising it, and acknowledging it. The latest iteration of that was Homelessness Action Plan. We didn't have a plan before, but it was an action plan. So the next iteration has to be a number of things, a much more strategic approach, a strategy with some underlying principles that we can all agree on to guide it, so that we can prioritise how resources are done and how community organisations can respond, and do even more in the future. It needs to be long-term, and it does have to include the voices of the people who use the services. And to be honest, that's the biggest one, and that's going to require the biggest change, because it requires a letting go of decision making, or an openness. I mean, you could call that power, but I'm learning on this, and actually we're so used to working in a certain way that it's quite hard to stop, be quiet, listen, and change. But that would be some of the challenges for us moving forward. But again, we need to frame that. If we want to make the change, we have to work out that more of the fulfillment of the right to a decent home, the long-term choice, appropriate housing wherever it is, well-designed, culturally accessible, all these other things, healthy, in different locations with the right kind of support. We have to do more of that so we can slowly do less, hopefully, switching the tap off, That's going to take a long time, and it comes back to how do we navigate out of it. Short-term solutions aren't going to convince anyone now. We really have to come together with a long-term strategy.
David, thanks very much for coming and talking to us today here at Holy Trinity.
Pleasure to be here, Paul.
The State of the Sector: The Challenges and Evolving Solutions Within the Community Housing Sector, by Chris Gloradell. The state of the community housing sector is strong and growing. There are an increasing number of Maori organisations delivering solutions, addressing long-standing failures to meet their needs. Pacific organisations are beginning to establish a presence, responding to their need for healthy and affordable homes. Other organisations with a longer history in housing continue to grow their offerings and abilities to serve diverse needs. Organisations providing community housing navigate a complex and changing landscape. Innovation and resilience are required to respond to evolving housing needs, policy and funding settings, and market forces impacting on building and construction. Community housing organisations are housing developers and managers, responsible for caring for both families and homes, carefully balancing their social purpose with business discipline to ensure the long-term sustainability of their homes and organisations. Community housing providers have long been innovators. Organisations responded to declining home ownership rates decades ago by developing new pathways through self-build, rent-to-own and shared equity programs. As these became harder to deliver in recent years due to increases in housing costs, they didn't end their ownership programs. They evolved them by developing a new leasehold model, reducing costs and enabling families to have the security of ownership and low land rent costs. They also successfully advocated for government support, resulting in the $400 million Progressive Home Ownership Fund. To respond to people experiencing homelessness not well served by existing models, providers identified the evidence-based Housing First approach and introduced it to New Zealand in 2015. They advocated for and received government support for the model in 2016. Arohanui ki te tangata, a group of Maori housing first providers supported by Te Matapihi, continued that innovation by embedding Te Ao Maori in their programs. Other Maori providers are developing new models to build on Wenua Maori, working around the barriers imposed by Western land and financial systems. Funding and finance are key to the delivery of homes affordable to low and moderate income wānau. The frequent changes to these settings demonstrate the resilience of community providers. Over the past 25 years, providers have utilised government support when available. The changing programs include the Housing Innovation Fund, Social Housing Fund, access to income-related rents, the Progressive Home Ownership Fund, the Affordable Housing Fund, Waikainga Wairanga funds for Maori providers, and various housing services programs. As most organisations are registered charities, they have limited means to raise equity, and real estate development is expensive. This has not stopped their growth. Allowing registered CHIPs access to income-related rents in 2014 coincided with the end of capital grants. This model relies on debt financing to build new homes with guaranteed market rents, ensuring their ability to pay a bank mortgage. Seeing the limits of their balance sheets, providers began to explore new ways to access equity whilst retaining ownership of the homes themselves. Although not completely solved, new partnerships have demonstrated how providers and equity investors can work together for this outcome. Since forming in 2004, Community Housing Aotearoa has supported the sector to innovate and respond to a changing policy environment. Over that time, primary responsibility for housing policy has shifted through the Housing New Zealand Corporation, the Department of Building and Housing, the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, the Ministry of Social Development, and now the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development / Te Tuapapa, Kura Kainga, Housing and Urban Development. While navigating this shifting landscape, the sector has steadily grown its provision of social and affordable housing. In 2007, the Centre for Housing Research Aotearoa, New Zealand, estimated 3,467 homes in the non-governmental or third sector. By 2014, a Centre for Research, Evaluation and Social Assessment report estimated the sector had grown to over 4,021 homes. At that time, local authorities maintained approximately 13,400 homes, while Housing New Zealand, now Kainga Ora, had about 65,000 homes. CHAR estimates that the sector overall now provides more than 30,000 homes. Kainga Ora has grown to over 72,000 homes. Council housing has reduced to around 6,800, with much of that transferred into registered community housing providers. The best data available relates to registered community housing providers. Information provided by the Community Housing Regulatory Authority and Housing and Urban Development's Housing Dashboard indicates the 88 registered CHIPs deliver a substantial housing portfolio, approximately 19,700 housing units in total, 13,920 income-related rent subsidy tenancies, nearly 5,000 affordable rentals, 455 market rentals, and 424 active assisted home ownership / progressive home ownership units. The wider sector also manages approximately 6,400 transitional housing units. In addition, there are more homes funded through Waikainga Wairanga and other programs developed by Maori organisations. Adding those homes along with progressive home ownership homes, now solely owned by families and contributions from non-registered providers, suggests the overall impact of community organisations could approach 30,000 homes. This estimate does not include wānau who were able to independently reach home ownership with the savings realised from living in an affordable rental home offered by a community provider. Of the homes managed by registered community housing providers, 948 are leased from Kainga Ora, 1,140 were purchased from Kainga Ora, 2,600 are new builds, and 9,000 are redirects, existing homes converted to social housing. While redirects make up a significant portion of the current stock, the sector recognises the need to increase new supply. Currently, The sector has contributed approximately 20% of total homes funded through the income-related rent subsidy via new construction. New builds peaked at 656 units in 2021, with targets of 1,500 new units over the next 2 years. The sector faces the challenge of exceeding its historical production rate. This will require greater collaboration across the sector and with government partners. A key challenge noted by sector leaders is the difficulty in scaling construction activity up and down in response to funding changes. Sustainable growth requires consistent policy and funding approaches. Based on the sector's track record, CHAR is confident that community providers will continue to innovate and grow their housing provision.
During a course of interviews over the past year, we asked various people involved in the housing sector their thoughts on what makes community housing, providers and CHIPs unique. This article is a brief summary of their accounts. Kay Saville-Smith.
What is the difference between community housing and KO? I think the difference is, and the strength of community housing is that it can be anywhere within a community. KO tends not to be, for both historic reasons, but also because of the way in which economies of scale work. You know, it tends to cluster together groups of people, tends to be in large cities, etc., etc. There is some stuff going around, but community housing is always not just part of the community, but an active player within the community, and they can provide not only friendly landlord services, but a diversity of housing products, from ownership and shared ownership right through to affordable rent, right through to supported housing. That's something that is quite unique. Not every community housing organisation should do that, but the sector is a hugely diverse sector which can tailor itself to the immediate needs of its peoples and its places.
Philippa Howden-Chapman.
They have their fingers on things locally in the way that they can track people around and know people. So that's irreplaceable. But there is also a role for the government agencies to understand what issues they're dealing with. So I think it has to be a partnership. And I think if we start getting in, clear out and we can do it all by ourselves, but actually, even if people are doing it themselves, they need some capital, some infrastructure. And last time it was all, let's get rid of Housing New Zealand and we'll just have the community place. That lasted for a while, and then they didn't have any capital to actually maintain them. And so there's been negotiations sort of buying some of those back. It costs a lot of money to maintain a house, even if it's built well in the beginning.
Megan Woods.
If we're going to solve this housing crisis, it's got to be both. And our actions in government speak on that. That under our government over the last 6 years, we've seen more than 7,000 places delivered by the community housing sector. To put that in perspective, when we came into government, there were 5,000 places provided by the sector. There's today over 12,000. We've more than 5 times increased the amount of funding going in so those homes can be operated with the kind of support that they need to be. But at the same token, we haven't seen that as an excuse of a dereliction of duty on the role of government either, that we've also been building. The problem and how we got into this mess is a decade before we had a government that said, we're going to leave it to the community sector, we're not going to fund it properly. And the net result was 1,500 fewer houses when we got back into government than when we left the time before. Not only did we not build, but we actually lost public houses. So you can't say one or the other. My fear is what we're hearing again is a code for that dereliction of duty. What we had was our previous state-owned houses, by then Housing New Zealand, that some were sold to community housing providers, but some were just sold off. So when we got back into government, there were 1,500 fewer houses across both the community sector and the government than when we left office. Now, you'd expect over 9 years that there would have been some increase. So not only did we lose 1,500, but there was a failure to deliver. If the previous government had delivered at the rate we are, we'd have 20,000 more houses today than we do.
Jill Hawkey.
I think community housing has got a real strength in that we're based in local communities. And so we have an understanding of the community and that we know what kind of wraparound supports people need in order to sustain their tenancies. So I think what's different often between us and Kāinga Ora is the level of support, whether it be social service support, whether it be community development workers that are provided in the housing developments that we do. So for example, if I think about, we've got a new housing development of 15 family homes. We bought a 16th house to use as a community house. We employ a community development worker who's in that house, and his job has really been to build neighbourhoods and build community between those different families. And it's really exciting to see what's happened.
Honourable Chris Bishop.
We're big believers in the community housing sector. If you look at other countries, social and community housing is provided by a mixture of central government, the state, but also local community housing associations or local charities or non-profit institutions. In New Zealand, most of our social housing or community housing is provided by Kāinga Ora, which is a government-owned near monopoly. And one of the things the last national government put in place was a funding framework to allow the community sector to grow. And that's why you've seen a lot of community housing providers spring up in the last few years and obtain access to government rental support called the income related rent subsidy, for example, and that has proven really successful. And community housing providers tend to be more nimble, they tend to be more agile. You think of a group like the Salvation Army, for example, provide excellent wraparound pastoral care for people they're looking after, and there's a whole swathe of community housing providers around the country who do a great job. Some of them limited to particular communities, others of them more nationwide. So we want to put in place that funding framework and continue that funding framework to allow them to grow.
Jade Karki.
Yeah, I guess I think I'll start by prefacing that I think the community housing sector is maturing, but I think there's still some serious limitations. And I think that's more down to the government policy settings than down to the providers themselves. It was interesting to hear some of the comments this morning, particularly from Victoria Carroll, who was saying, well, when I've come to these in this past, these conferences are pretty white. And she was just being honest. And then she followed on with saying, but it's great to see how much this has shifted and to see the diversity in the room. And I felt encouraged by that too. I remember when I first sort of started being in this space, I did feel like it was very Pākehā dominated and all wonderful, well-meaning people who really care about the kaupapa. But it does something, or it distorts the conversation when you don't have the balance of demographics right. And it's the same with our elected representatives. When they don't represent the communities they serve, that's a problem. And I think that's true for those of us who are working in the community housing space if we don't appropriately reflect the demographics of those communities that we're working with and that we serve. Which is all to say that I think the role of community housing, and Kay Saville-Smith put forward some good provocations this morning, but I think the role of community housing really is to be these insiders who really know and understand the communities they work with, and they're able to tailor their approaches to be fit for purpose for those communities that they're working with. And I think they also have the social imperatives and the commitments to, placemaking and forming strong community and facilitating great communities outcomes and being there all the way along. So they're not kind of, going to just develop something and then be like, okay, well, over to you, best of luck. We're members of the community, we're committed to this community, and we're working together to both shape what it needs to be and how it looks and continues on into the future. So it's that sustained commitment and that deep knowledge and knowing of that specific community that I think differentiates community housing providers from others such as Kāinga Ora and also the private sector.
Jacqueline Paul.
No, I definitely think everybody has a role, and I talk about this more specifically in the context of te tiriti, right, for tangata whenua, for Māori and for non-Māori, and the roles that different actors have either within those different spheres or in the relational together, working together. So
there's different ways in which actors can contribute to, the diverse options that are available, whether it's for both Māori or non-Māori, and then for Māori that is by Māori, for Māori, right? So, and that can be both private actors and Māori. So there's a lot of partnerships. Everyone has a role in supporting them. And actually, some of the most innovative solutions that I've seen have been between Māori and the private sector as well. So there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate and address a lot of these issues. But we were talking about earlier, these other elements that come into play, being able to have those wraparound services that many wouldn't have access to if it was just a, standalone home without that community. Thinking about cultural connections as well. And so thinking about reciprocity and building those things rather than, just living in isolation in your individual dwelling. So really fostering that collective kind of effort to ensure that people are connected and have a sense of belonging. So, there's different ways in which, and I guess it depends who you talk to as well, who might prefer one or the other as well. So,
Roine Lealeo Loto.
Knowing your community. And this is what I said this morning about the importance of by Pacific for Pacific providers. We live it. If you looked at this morning, the Pacific speakers, even in the workshops, all of them had similar stories, got quite emotional about those stories, including the minister. And because we know what our realities are, the sacrifices our parents made that we can never forget. The vision was created from there. The transiency, the fact we'd had to move several times before getting into home ownership. The desires of our parents, our forefathers who wanted us to have somewhere stable that they could go to their graves peacefully knowing that we would be okay. And so that's what has fueled having that knowledge is really fueling our developments because we know and we've been there. We know what it's like to be poor. We know what it's like to be homeless. We know what it's like to be challenged and not know, where you're going to be staying at next, when the fear of when you're getting behind on rent and, fear of losing housing. And I think, always remembering that, always make sure that you work doubly hard to ensure that others don't have the experience that you've been through. I think within community housing providers, they're able to meet people where they're at, with all the issues that come and have a hope of being able to support that. So that supportive wraparound supports for many, that perhaps organisations like Kāinga Ora don't have the capacity to, they're about providing public housing, they collect rent, they, make sure that people are housed and they have, they're well resourced to do that. But community providers, I think they have had to grow with a smell of an oily rag. Our organisation, we started off on $58,000. And, I always tell the story how the funder said to me, well, Marini, that's your foot in the door. And I said, I have a very big foot. And so, coming from that to where we are at now, and the sacrifices, and I know that that's what other community housing providers have had to do. And, I think also that they get a bad rap. It's almost like, that, if we see community housing providers becoming financially, stronger, they've been able to build their equity as organisations, we think that there's something sinister in it. But is that not what government expects of their own organisations? To be able to live within budgets, to be able to obtain surpluses where they need to obtain surpluses. So community housing providers don't have the luxury of an assured funding pool. Where the Kāinga Ora stuffs up the budget, government's not going to let them fall because they're their main vehicle. But if we do not live and practice within the confines of what we've funded for and what we've said we'll do, the funding can be cut from government And so we always live with the threat of those things, because at the end of the day, we don't hold the putea.
Greg Orchard.
I think one of the key characteristics historically has been is they have been local in New Zealand, and I think that's really critical. And local doesn't mean you can't be a national provider, but you've got to somehow be local in that community. And most of our community housing providers are local, and even more so when you start to look at some of our iwi Māori providers. They're very local. It's dealing with specific issues and populations they know intimately, and I think that's pretty critical in how they work. I think the benefits of community housing provision is, while I'm a strong advocate of that regulatory model, you also have sovereignty within your organisation and with your decision making around what you're going to do. And that point I made earlier around, if the frameworks are set, you can then decide how you want to participate in that. That's critically important, because other entities, which are government entities, are always, their master of the day changes and the policy positions change. And so as a result of that, what you end up doing is you move based on that political whim of, whim's been unkind because it's not a whim, but that political direction and where investment needs to go at any point in time. So as a community housing provider, you can take a longer term, often a generational view of what you're doing and what you're looking to provide. Your mission, if you like, being a mission-driven organisation, your mission is something that is sustained over a long time. And I think if you look at community housing organisations, they're not, and you look at what their mission vision statements have been, they tend to, well, some of the little bits of words might change. They tend to be, we're heading this is what we were set up for. This is our charitable purpose, if you like. You look at government organisations and it comes and goes. I'm not saying that they're not trying to achieve an objective, but the how often will change, or the investment changes. So I think, if you were investing, if you're looking for a way people to look at community housing providers, I think one, there's what they stand for, that they take an extremely long view. They are local and they understand the community and the need. They the way they operate and they do the business, the capability in those organisations has been built over many, many years, and it has been sustained. So it's not you don't see organisations where there's not turnover, but when you look at the people that are in that place and playing in that space within the community housing sector, there's a huge depth of knowledge in there.
Alison Cadman.
I think one of the unique things about Dwell and community housing providers is the relationships, the huge amount of relationships that we manage all the time, and not just manage, we relish them. They're just a core part of what we do. And that's just such a wide spectrum of people. And I think the other thing is, from that comes our sense of the need to help those other people in our community that we can help. And we do everything that we can within our, resources that we have to try and do more. I think it really is the fact that we care. And we care about not just building houses or managing tenancies, but we care that people who live in our homes will actually do well and live well and be well. It's very hard to describe something that's so ingrained and so innate and such a strong part of our culture within our organisation. But I think the key thing is we have a tagline more than a landlord, and I think that really says what we are. There's an interesting space that we work in, I think, that traditional tenancy management and the well-being, the social work support, and we're very strong in between, and that's often not recognised, that space. And that's the space where we will notice what's happening with people. If there's someone's been paying rent for fine and they all of a sudden stop, that's a trigger for us. We go past a house and the rubbish is collecting more than, normal. One of the neighbours will tell us about a concern of somebody. I think that's what we do really well, is that space of looking and seeing and knowing. And I think that's because we care. Yeah.
Greg Foster.
We often say amongst ourselves, the Salvation Army, the social housing area, we like providing tenancy with a heart, okay? So we want to provide long-term housing for people, but we also want to be involved in helping support them by providing, when necessary, sort of wraparound services so that we can support them not only through a house, but also support them through any issues that people are facing. And we also want to create community. We're a very individualistic sort of society. Not all of us know who our neighbours are, etc. And I think that's to our societal detriment, right? So what we say is that we believe that providing community is an important next step for people in terms of making people whole. We often talk about making people whole in the Salvation Army, and providing a house, providing community, providing ongoing care is really important to us. Our real focus is on that housing, creating community. Then we link, when people have needs, we link them to other social service providers or within their army. Okay, so, when you look at a lot of developments now, apartment complexes or whatever, they just focused on building the house, right? Which is an important thing. You can't put people there unless you have that house. But in all of our developments, we also add a community centre there, and that's where we'll have a staff member there, and we'll have a TV, we'll have coffee making machines, etc. And we invite the tenants, we call them our whānau, to be involved in community, and it's based out of that community centre. So if you went to any of our developments, our new developments now, you'd see houses, but you'd also see the focal point of it as a community hall. And that's where our staff are based. Community groups run classes out of there. There might be English as a second language. There might be Te Reo lessons, etc. It's all active, all involved in trying to pull people in and trying to build this community in our developments.
Campbell Roberts.
Well, I think one of the key things in a housing system is that you've somehow got to link it to the local. You've got to allow communities to be engaged in the sort of housing that they want. If you go back to very early communities in New Zealand, Māori communities, without any benefit system or without any sort of government involvement, they actually looked after te whānau and built a community. And communities have got to continue to do that. They've got to be engaged with that. They can't have some body sort of coming in and saying, well, look, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. I mean, you can do that and it may work, but it's certainly not as good as actually allowing the community to take care of its. And I think that's what community housing organisations are able to do. They're often local people who are working in that situation and can understand what's going on, understand the dynamics, understand the politics, and can make a contribution.
as against that, I was on the Kaingaora board, and I think in the staff that were in the Māori that were responsible, big housing development on Māori. There was nobody in that working in that development that actually came out of Māori. They were all coming from other parts of the city. And so you've just got to say that, and the people who are making decisions about that also were not living in that community. Now, I mean, some of that's inevitable, but the more you can connect the community with what you're doing and what's going on and who's making the decisions, and a good housing system will do that. A good housing system, and to be fair, organisations like Kaingaora have realised that and tried to do it and tried to put emphasis on a place-based approach, but it's still limited in how effective that can be, because as against a community organisation which understands the community, which can talk to the plumber and the builder and all the rest of it.
The CHAR National Conference 2024 took place on the 26th, 27th and 28th of November at AUT City Campus in Auckland. It was our most ambitious and diverse conference to date. Ambitious because over 30 groups ran in-depth sessions and workshops. Diverse because we came together with our people, our knowledge and our sector, as we all strive to see all people well housed. Our conference theme was growing together, sharing our knowledge. Through building and strengthening our relationships, we will better serve all people. The feedback we have received from the conference was overwhelmingly positive. We want to take this opportunity to sincerely thank everyone who took part in the CHAR conference. Over 500 people attended in person, with more than 400 people joining us online across both days. The 2 site tours were booked out, and we were blessed with good weather and safe travels. We were pleased to welcome both Ministers of Housing, Honourable Chris Bishop and Honourable Tama Portaka, who joined us to make housing-related announcements. We would like to acknowledge and thank our hosts, Taiaha Hawke of Ngāti Watua Orakei, Vice-Chancellor Damon Salesa and Professor John Tukey, and AUT, all our sponsors, and our exhibitors, who enabled us to come together in Auckland. A huge mihi also to the facilitators and speakers who provided a range of thought-provoking and sometimes challenging working sessions, inviting us to participate, share and learn together. The next CHAR conference will take place in 2026. This year, Te Matapihi and Ngapuhi invite you to the 2025 National Māori Housing Conference at Waitangi, commencing Monday 20th October.
In our next Insight report, we will shine a light on a range of existing financial settings, products and services. We look to the future to discuss how we all could make positive changes so that the housing system serves all people better. We will be highlighting current financial structures and potential improvements to better serve all New Zealanders, international examples of more efficient housing funding methods, guest commentary on New Zealand's economic overemphasis on residential property wealth, potential tax structure reforms for more equitable housing outcomes, analysis of effective debt and equity structures, subsidies and supports, historical successful programs such as state advances loans and family benefit capitalisation that could be reintroduced, and the impact of long-term, low-cost mortgages and their intergenerational benefits, especially as young families increasingly rely on parental support. The next Insight report will be available in August. Until then, Make sure you subscribe to the Char Hub podcast on your favourite podcast platform, and remember to send us your feedback on the articles in this edition.